Deep beneath the mountains of Iran, under hundreds of meters of solid rock, sits a network the United States has been trying to destroy for months, and still hasn't. Iran calls them missile cities. U.S. Central Command has spent 9 straight nights bombing them, according to CENTCOM's own statements relayed by CNN, and in the most intense wave yet, CENTCOM says it has just hit Iranian command centers, coastal missile positions, and underground storage, facilities in a single coordinated operation aimed at Iran's ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't a new war. It's a war that restarted after a ceasefire collapsed in July, and it's now producing casualties on both sides, a naval blockade, and public warnings from the U.S. president about a second nuclear-adjacent facility that could be next. Here's what's confirmed, who's confirming it, and why this moment matters more than the last 9 nights combined. This war didn't start this week. It restarted. In February 2026, President Trump announced what he called major combat operations against Iran, launching joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on military, government, and infrastructure targets. According to Britannica's ongoing conflict timeline, that opening wave killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with dozens of senior officials, and a missile also struck a girls' school next to a naval base near Bandar Abbas, killing roughly 170 people. A strike Iran has repeatedly cited as justification for the scale of its retaliation. Iran's response, per Britannica's account, was immediate. Retaliatory missile and drone strikes on U.S. embassies, bases, and oil infrastructure across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Oman, and Jordan, plus attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the corridor that carries roughly a fifth of the world's oil. By June, mediators, Qatar and Pakistan, according to CNN's live coverage, brokered a memorandum of understanding meant to end the war within 60 days. It held for a few weeks. Then, in July, Iran struck 3 commercial vessels that had bypassed an agreed shipping route. Trump declared the ceasefire over, and CENTCOM resumed strikes on Iranian soil almost immediately. Iranian government spokesperson Esmail Baghaei told reporters, as quoted by CNN, that the U.S. had breached the memorandum's reciprocal commitments, making Iranian compliance practically impossible. What's followed, according to the CENTCOM's own nightly statements relayed by CNN and Al Jazeera, is the most sustained bombing campaign of the war. 9 consecutive nights of strikes on Iranian command. Tehran prepared for exactly this scenario, saying plans to close the Strait of Hormuz were drawn up from the very first day after Khamenei's death, and that Iran redesigned its missile launcher systems during the roughly 8-month lull between wars, specifically so sustained firing wouldn't deplete the stockpile. If accurate, that single claim explains why this war keeps circling back to the same underground targets. Intercepting missiles in the air, or hitting individual launchers, doesn't solve the problem if the supply chain underneath is intact. The February war itself built on an earlier round of fighting. Wikipedia's sourced timeline of the conflict notes that in June 2025, the U.S. carried out Operation Midnight Hammer, striking Iran's Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites with GBU-57 bunker buster bombs dropped from B-2 bombers, alongside submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles, what's since become known as the 12-Day War. Iran responded at the time with a missile strike on Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which Qatari officials said intercepted 13 of 14 missiles fired, with no casualties reported. Iran's own account, per the same Wikipedia entry, claimed 14 missiles fired with 6 successful hits. Discrepancy that illustrates how even basic strike outcomes are contested between the two sides throughout this conflict, not just in this latest phase. Notably, Iran reportedly gave Qatar and the U.S. advance warning before that strike, a detail that stands in contrast to the less predictable pattern of retaliation seen in the current war. That round ended in a ceasefire that held in various strained forms until the war reignited in February 2026. By June 2026, per CNN's reporting, exhaustion on all sides produced the Memorandum of Understanding brokered by Qatar and Pakistan, a framework meant to formally close out the war within 60 days. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei has since characterized that agreement, in comments CNN cited, as built on reciprocal commitments that Washington subsequently broke. Whichever side's account of the breakdown is accurate, the practical result was the same. Within weeks, Iran struck 3 commercial vessels bypassing an agreed shipping route. Trump publicly called the ceasefire dead, and CENTCOM resumed nightly strikes. Throughout this period, the U.S. also maintained a significant regional troop and equipment buildup, a separate but related story tract, in Wikipedia's ongoing entry on the 2026 U.S. military buildup in the Middle East, which the Gulf basing dynamics discussed in Section 4 depend heavily on. That buildup is part of why so many neighboring countries, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, have found themselves absorbing Iranian retaliation despite having no direct role in the original dispute. American aircraft, ships, and personnel are stationed on their territory, which makes those bases legitimate. Military targets under Iran's stated logic of retaliating against anywhere U.S. forces operate from. What makes this round different from the June 2025 exchange, based on the reporting available, is duration and intensity. The 12-day war was, as its name suggests, a short and contained exchange. This resumption, as of CNN's July 19th count, had already run 9 consecutive nights of U.S. strikes, with no announced end date. And Arakchi's own comments, that Iran redesigned its launcher system specifically to sustain indefinite firing without depleting its stockpile, suggest Tehran is planning for this phase to be a war of endurance rather than a short retaliatory exchange. On the American side, ABC News reported that CENTCOM confirmed 17 U.S. service member deaths since the war resumed, including one soldier reported missing in Jordan whose remains were located and are still being formally identified. These are the figures as reported by named outlets, not independently verified beyond what those organizations have published, and, as with any wartime casualty count, subject to revision. Here's what CENTCOM has actually confirmed. Per Al Jazeera's July 16th reporting, U.S. forces carried out a 90-minute operation against Bandar Abbas, a key Iranian naval hub on the Strait of Hormuz, along with coastal defense and cruise missile positions on Greater Tunb Island. CENTCOM's own statement, cited by Al Jazeera, described the target set as Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and coastal surveillance facilities, explicitly tied to reducing Iran's ability to disrupt shipping through the strait. Al Jazeera's report also noted Iran's own health ministry had said, as of that point in the war, at least 35 people had been killed and more than 300 injured since fighting resumed. An earlier and lower figure than the tally CNN later reported for the fuller June 27th, July 19th window, which is a useful reminder that these numbers are being updated continuously as the war continues, not fixed at a single count. CNN's July 17th coverage reported a further wave the following night, the 7th consecutive night at that point, hitting surveillance sites, military logistics infrastructure, underground weapons storage, and maritime capabilities using fighters. Aircraft, drones, and ship-launched strikes, according to a CENTCOM post cited by CNN. That same report noted Iranian strikes had hit Oman, Jordan, Kuwait, and Qatar in a single overnight window, with a child wounded in Qatar and 9 fighters from an Iranian Kurdish group killed in Iraq, detailed further in Section 4 below. By July 19th, per CNN's live blog, the U.S. strike tally had reached 9 consecutive nights, with CENTCOM providing fewer specifics on exact target counts than in earlier weeks of the campaign. A shift that could reflect operational security, or simply caution about publicizing results that satellite imagery might later contradict. CNN also reported that CENTCOM said it is now fully enforcing a naval blockade against Iranian ports, a step beyond routine interdiction, layered on top of the strikes on coastal missile sites. Taken together, that's a campaign aimed at squeezing Iran on 2 fronts: its ability to threaten shipping and what can move through its own ports. It's worth noting, CENTCOM's own language describes this as fully enforcing an existing blockade rather than announcing a brand new one, meaning some form of naval interdiction was reportedly already in place before this latest escalation, with this wave representing a tightening rather than the opening move. For context on scale, this blockade sits on top of a Strait of Hormuz corridor that, per Britannica's reporting, normally carries around a fifth of global oil supply, which is why even incremental enforcement changes. There tend to move energy markets, as described in Section 4. There are signs the campaign isn't finished. Fox News Digital reported that President Trump told the network's chief foreign correspondent, Trey Yingst, that the U.S. is watching a nuclear-adjacent tunnel complex near the Natanz facility, sometimes referred to as Pickaxe Mountain, saying, there's another one we're looking at right now. Commercial satellite imagery from Vantor, published alongside that Fox News report, shows the scale of the tunnel system beneath the site. If it struck, that would mark an expansion of the campaign into territory adjacent to Iran's nuclear program specifically, which carries different stakes than a conventional missile depot, given how central nuclear infrastructure has been to Iran's broader standoff with the U.S. and Israel well before this current war began. Al Jazeera's reporting also noted that unnamed U.S. officials described the broader logic behind the strikes as shaping operations, degrading Iran's radar coverage and coastal defenses, not as an end in themselves, but as groundwork for larger operations that Trump has reportedly been considering. It's worth being direct about what that phrase means, and doesn't mean it's sourced to officials Al Jazeera did not name, describing intent rather than a confirmed future operation. Whether larger operations materializes and what it looks like is not yet public information. It's the direction multiple officials have pointed reporters toward, not a confirmed plan. For a news script trying to stay strictly accurate, that distinction matters. There's a real difference between officials say this is preparation for something bigger, and the US has announced a bigger operation. And right now, the reporting only supports the former. Iran's underground missile program isn't new, and it isn't improvised. Reporting from 1945 traces the doctrine back to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, when Iranian cities and military sites were bombed relentlessly and Tehran had neither modern air defenses nor long-range strike capability to respond. That experience convinced Iranian planners that anything built above ground would eventually be found and destroyed. So, over decades, missile production, storage, and launch infrastructure moved underground into what are now colloquially called missile cities. Tunnel and cavern complexes built into mountains and remote terrain, housing missiles, launchers, fuel systems, and command infrastructure. According to 1945, citing Israeli sources, some of these facilities are capable of producing hundreds of ballistic missiles a month. State media has periodically put this arsenal on public display. RFE-RL reported in March 2025 that Iranian state television aired footage of what it called an underground missile city, presented by Armin Tsumyao, Ed Force's Chief of Staff Mohammad Bakeri, and IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Amir Ali Hajizadeh, showing advanced weapon systems mounted on mobile launcher vehicles parked inside the tunnels. RFE-RL noted the release came at a moment of high tension with Washington and framed it as a deliberate signal of deterrence, Iran demonstrating its arsenal's survivability at a time when its regional proxy network had been significantly weakened and could no longer be relied on for deterrence the way it once was. RFE-RL's earlier March 2021, reporting on a different underground facility inaugurated by the IRGC, noted that Iran has claimed to have such facilities across the country since at least 2011, with concentrations reported near the southern coast close to the Strait of Hormuz, meaning the missile city concept long predates the current war and reflects a genuinely long-running national strategy rather than something built in response to this conflict specifically. The evidence that this underground approach is at least partially working comes from CNN's own satellite imagery reporting from May 31st. At a missile base north of Kermanshah, CNN reported that tunnel entrances bombed by the US and Israel had been reopened, and access roads deliberately cratered to block launcher vehicles had been repaired and repaved. At a second site near Khomeini, satellite imagery reviewed by CNN showed construction vehicles actively clearing a bombed tunnel entrance as of mid-April. CNN quoted unnamed analysts as saying the continued threat from Iran's arsenal is being underestimated given a dwindling U.S. supply of interceptor missiles, a specific sourced claim, though the analysts themselves weren't named in that report. The same CNN piece cautioned that strikes on Iran's missile factories may not prevent Tehran from reconstituting production capability for as long as the U.S. and Israel would prefer, a line that reads today, as a fairly accurate forecast of exactly the cycle this script has been describing since the war resumed in July. That resilience has real consequences. The National, in reporting published July 19th, said Iran has restored more than half of its pre-war missile capacity through these underground facilities, citing unnamed U.S. officials, and that Iran has adapted its missiles to travel at higher speeds with maneuverable descent profiles specifically designed to defeat American air defenses. If accurate, that combination, rebuilt production capacity plus missiles engineered to beat existing interceptors, is a harder problem than simply outlasting a bombing campaign. It's a moving target, getting more effective in real time. The National's reporting further connected this to Jordan's role as a staging ground for U.S. aircraft, framing the missile strikes there as part of a broader Iranian effort to weaken regional air defense coverage ahead of any larger offensive, a strategic read that lines up with the shaping operation language U.S. officials used in Al Jazeera's reporting on the Jordan strikes covered in Section 4. CNN's May 31st reporting also cited concern that strikes on Iran's missile factories, some of which were hit during the earlier 12-day war as well, haven't permanently halted production. Satellite imagery reviewed at the time showed Iran had already rebuilt some facilities targeted the previous June, and CNN cited U.S. intelligence assessments indicating Iran was restarting drone production and replacing damaged missile launchers, and manufacturing equipment even while the bombing campaign continued overhead. None of this means Iran's underground network is invulnerable or untouched. CENTCOM's own strike descriptions this month specifically cite underground weapons storage among the targets hit. The honest picture, based on the reporting available, is a back and forth. The U.S. hits underground facilities, Iran repairs and reopens them within weeks, and both sides appear to be adjusting tactics in response to the other, which is a very different story than either the network is untouchable or the network has been destroyed. Every U.S. escalation has drawn an Iranian response, not just against American forces, but against the countries hosting them. CNN's July 13th live coverage reported IRGC strikes on Bahrain, with sirens sounding twice in one night, and the Interior Ministry urging residents to shelter in place. The IRGC claimed in a statement CNN cited to have hit weapon support warehouses, a satellite communications center, and a building housing U.S. forces at Bahrain's Jaffair base, a claim CNN noted is unverified, as Iranian claims about U.S. bases have often gone unconfirmed throughout the war. That same CNN report noted the U.S. completed a separate round of strikes on Iran at 10:15 p.m. the same night, with the Iranian army saying in a statement that its own retaliatory drone strikes on Kuwait specifically targeted communication systems, fuel tanks, a Patriot air defense battery, a watchtower, and an ammunition depot. Kuwait's army, in a statement reported by CNN, said its air defenses intercepted a wave of ballistic missiles and drones, though the attacks still injured Kuwaiti land forces personnel and sparked a fire at a power, generation, and desalination plant. Jordan's military, per ABC News, reported 3 incoming Iranian missiles intercepted, and a 4th landing in a remote southern area, with no casualties reported in that particular incident. The National reported that U.S. officials view the Jordan strikes as a possible shaping operation and to erode air defenses roughly 100 kilometers from Israeli territory. Again, a characterization sourced to officials, not a confirmed Iranian objective, and worth treating as an assessment rather than a proven fact. Qatar and Oman were also hit in the same window, according to Al Jazeera's July 18th live blog, which reported a child wounded by shrapnel in Qatar from an intercepted strike. In Iraq, CNN reported 9 fighters from an Iranian Kurdish opposition group were killed in a separate Iranian strike, according to an official from that group, an account that comes from a single source with a direct stake in the conflict and hasn't been independently corroborated elsewhere in available reporting. The economic impact has been measurable and immediate. CNN reported that after Iran struck 2 UAE-flagged tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, killing 1 crew member, and hit Bahrain in the same period, Brent crude jumped more than 9.5%, its largest single-day gain in 6 years, settling near $80 a barrel. The U.S. canceled consular appointments and relocated non-emergency personnel out of the UAE, per that same reporting. That kind of market reaction underscores how directly this war, even when confined mostly to strikes on military infrastructure, is being priced by global energy markets as a genuine supply chain risk, not a contained regional skirmish. Several Arab governments have publicly pushed back, with Al Jazeera reporting sharp criticism from regional states over the toll Iranian strikes are taking on countries hosting U.S. forces, a diplomatic strain that sits alongside and separate from the direct military damage those countries have absorbed. The strain hasn't been limited to Gulf Arab states either. Wikipedia's sourced entry on Iranian strikes against British military facilities notes that Iran targeted British bases and personnel cooperating with U.S. forces during this war, with strikes recorded in Cyprus, the Indian Ocean, and Iraq. Separate Wikipedia entry documents an earlier Iranian strike toward the joint U.S.-UK base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, which prompted the UK Foreign Secretary to publicly condemn what officials called Iran's reckless threats, according to reporting from The Guardian cited in that entry. Together, these episodes show a war that has drawn in America's broader alliance network, not just its immediate regional partners, even though Britain has not been a primary combatant. Israel, meanwhile, has kept its own threat live. CNN's July 19th coverage quoted Defense Minister Israel Katz saying Israel will respond and strike back without any dependence or conditions if attacked, with IDF Chief of Staff Ayal Kamir adding forces are ready to resume full combat with great determination. That standing posture means a single Iranian missile reaching Israeli territory could widen this considerably, even though, as of this reporting, Israel has not been directly struck during this latest phase of the conflict. On diplomacy, CNN reported Iranian officials have not ruled out renewed talks even as fighting continues, with government spokesperson Baghei saying that just as war serves to safeguard Iran's interests, negotiations remain another avenue toward the same goal. Qatar and Pakistan are still mediating and passing proposals to Tehran, per that same reporting, though Iran's supreme leader has, per CNN, dismissed Trump's word as worthless and unreliable, a comment that suggests the diplomatic track, while technically open, is under real strain.